Okay. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up or say, yes, we hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. All right. It's a little bit early, but put your name in the chat so that I have a record that you were here. And we'll stall for a couple minutes while other people show up. And we'll see how that goes. So we're about halfway there. Okay. All right. There we go. More people coming. There we go. Okay. Again, put your name in the chat if you're here. If you're not, don't. I need a record that you're here so I can give you the grade. Okay. All right. Here we go. That's looking pretty good. Okay. All right. I have 9 o'clock, so I'm going to start. First of all, a couple of things to say. Let's look at the schedule right off the bat. There it is. Do you see the lecture topics and assigned reading schedule? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we just finished exam 3 last week. Okay, so that was while we were working on the autonomic nervous system. This week we're starting the neurological exam, chapter 16. That's the last chapter that we're going to do. We have a short week next week and then a week of review for the final. But you see there's a little asterisk by November 16th. And on the bottom it says November 19th, last day to withdraw. That's tomorrow. Okay. So usually it would be really nice to have all your grades in before you knew that. If you were thinking of withdrawing, you should send me an email. Obviously your grade looks lower now because there's an exam open that hasn't been corrected. So then Moodle, when it calculates your score, just assumes you got a 0 on that. And then I have a couple grades open. But if you look at your average for the other exams and your average on the quizzes, those are the 3 biggest parts of your grade. Okay. So, did you have a question? Okay. So if you're thinking of dropping, let me know before you do so. Drop deadline is tomorrow, but there's also a way around that. And so if you thought you had to drop and you weren't sure, you can let me know. There is an extension that instructors can give you a drop later. So I think I can drop you all the way through the following 2 weeks. So, and again, when I get the grades done, I'll post them, but that won't be before tomorrow. So hopefully it'll be by the weekend. And so if you're unsure, email me. I can tell you where you stand, and we can figure that out together. And then your exam grade will come over the weekend probably.
I don't know. You kind of like skipped a little bit or froze in the middle of that.
I did?
Yeah. I don't know if it was just for me.
Okay. Well, no, I'm at home, so my internet is less than good. So if you're uncertain about whether you should drop, you should send me an email. Okay. The drop deadline for student-initiated withdrawals is tomorrow. Okay. Instructors can withdraw students through another 2 weeks. And so if you were uncertain and wanted to figure out how you were doing, let me know. I would also give you a withdrawal after you have the grades for exam 3. So the drop deadline is not an absolute hard deadline. I would give you a withdrawal later than that. Okay? Does that make sense? Thumbs
Yes.
up? Okay. All right. Okay. Again, put your name into the chat so I have a record that you're here. So if you just showed up, type your name in so that I see you. Okay. Let's let's talk about the neurological exam. That's the last, the last chapter. It's a complex chapter. Um, this is kind of applied anatomy and physiology of the central and peripheral nervous system. And so this is important. And I should, like here they're talking about an Air Force nurse assessing someone like maybe after a concussion or something like that. But for me, these were really important in taking care of my parents. My dad passed away 5 years ago this October, and my mom passed away last year. And they were, my dad was 90 and my mom was in her 80s. And in one case, we did a mental status exam, which was extremely helpful. And in the other case, we didn't, and I really wish we would have. And so these exams are designed to help you assess the structure and function of the nervous system. They're done with, they can be done quickly, and they're not invasive, and they're done with very basic tools. A flashlight, a pen, paper, tongue depressor, and it allows you to assess how well this person can do various things. And so for my father was showing signs of dementia. So when he was, this was when he was, before he turned 80. So he lived 10 years after he first showed signs of dementia. And my mom was having trouble taking care of him. And so they were living about 100 miles away. And so I would go see them, once a month or so. And when my mom first said something to me, then I went in and I thought, oh boy, that, yeah, he's clearly showing signs of dementia, and that doesn't mean he was completely incapacitated or completely not who he was, but there were really signs that he couldn't do anything, that he couldn't do decision making. And one of the really hard things for my mom was kind of understanding what that meant and what it didn't mean. And so she was had been in a very traditional role. They married in the 1950s when a man went to work and women stayed home, raised kids, things like that. And she was used to having this really traditional role where he made most of the big decisions. And she was having trouble taking care of him. And so she wanted to move closer to me for some help. And but she would ask him and he would say no. And and my mom was used to saying, okay, well, he said no, that's that. And so when we went there, I started talking to her about what is dementia and that he can't make these decisions. And the hard thing was he was still himself. You could still carry a conversation with him. His memories from a long time ago were still quite good. He still recognized who we were. He could still carry on a conversation. He seemed like who he was. However, when we had the nurse come and give him a mental status exam and have my mom watch it, that was really helpful, because they ask him about orientation. They ask him to perform simple tasks like repeating a sentence, repeating a series of terms, and he couldn't do really simple things that you would think a child could do. And so they would give him a list of 5 numbers and ask him to repeat it, and he could get the first 2 back. They would ask him to orient where he was. Okay, what is today's date? Where are you? Who is the president? And he had trouble with that. And as my mom watched the mental status exam, it became clear that he couldn't make decisions, that he was still her husband, but he wasn't the person that should be relied on for major decisions. And that really helped my mom say, okay, we're going to move. I'm not going to ask him. That's not something we're going to do. And in fact, he didn't know he was going to move until he had already moved. And he was really quite accepting of it because he couldn't remember it. And so he would wake up and, at their new house, which was a block away from where I lived. And for a while he would ask, when are we going home? And she would say, well, we've been here 6 months and this is our home. And he would be puzzled by it because he didn't remember. He was having trouble forming new memories. So it was really helpful. Okay. On the other hand, after my father passed away, my mom was by herself, and she was still fairly sharp. She knew where she was. She kept track of her bills. She, she maintained a pretty good social network. She would discuss the news with us, but there were indications probably 2 years ago that she was having some difficulty. She asked me to take care of her finances because she could no longer balance her checkbook. Um, she was forgetting things occasionally. So, she could discuss that. Um, and so that made it easier for me to kind of help her. But on the other hand, when she had healthcare decisions, I had a hard time. I would treat her as if we could reason our way through these healthcare decisions. And it was her body, so I'm letting her make the decision. But at the point that we were at, she was not able to make those decisions. And I wish I would have had a mental status exam to help me kind of give her this is why you need to cede these decisions to me, because I can help you. And so it wasn't until she was really in trouble that we started taking those decisions from her. So the neurological exam is something that a nurse or any healthcare practitioner, or even a therapist can do to assess a quick assessment of a lot of parts of the nervous system. The mental status exam is a key portion of this. This is assessing functions of the cerebrum and some networks of the cerebrum, things like memory and orientation. The cranial nerve exam helps you examine the function of some of the cranial nerves. That's what he's doing there. The sensory exam lets you examine some parts of the somatic nervous system. The motor exam as well. And there's a coordination and gait exam, which again is part of that motor system of the somatic nervous system and partly the cerebellum. Okay, today I'm going to talk about the mental status exam. The mental status exam is something that orientation means where are you, what time is it, what day is it, how does this fit in the sequence of events of your life? Are you able to kind of put those things in order? Your ability to recall old memories, to form new memories, your ability, memory's ability with your short-term memory. Language and speech, really complex activities involving multiple parts of the brain. To understand speech, you need parts of your temporal lobe, and then to form speech, you need those temporal lobe regions to communicate with frontal lobe areas. And sometimes those speech things are also going to be stored in other parts of the brain. And then some of those executive function areas from the frontal lobe, judgment and abstract reasoning, are assessed in the mental status exam. An important reason you might give the mental status exam is if you suspect someone's had a stroke. And so this image here, and I'll have more to say next week about stroke, shows an image of someone who has damage to, it looks like the left side of their brain. And it might be the parietal or temporal lobes there. We might suspect that there might be impairments to speech, to processing heard speech, possibly also indications that maybe interfere with producing of new speech. And so that's a really good reason for giving a mental status exam. Probably some of the most important reasons are more mundane. As people age, they have changes in their neurological function that are hard to, they're hard to kind of guess at unless you know here I'm going to ask these specific questions and I'm going to go through this, because in casual conversation, I might not be able to tell that they've had this memory defect or there's a language or reasoning defect, things like that. And so, and I'm in my 50s. And so this is really important for people my age, because I'm at the point where some people are going to start losing some of these abilities. They're going to start seeing decreases in some of these functions. And for me, this has really been important, because my parents saw drop-offs in their 70s and 80s that were really pretty dramatic in what they could and couldn't do, and where they needed help and where they didn't need help. And you didn't always see that in day-to-day behavior. In day-to-day behavior, that was hard to say just what they could do or couldn't do. And so having a nurse or a therapist come in to assess them can be really, really helpful. Okay, and it was for me with my father, and I wish we would have had it with my mother. Okay, so again, with the mental status exam and all the neurological exam, it's important to have a good idea of what areas are processing what functions. And so particularly this mental status exam, we're talking about the cerebral cortex. We're talking about primary regions for the control of specific functions, like the primary motor region or the primary somatosensory region. We're talking about association areas like motor planning events, the sensory association areas that are involved in more detailed things we call integration, like the integration of speech, Wernicke's area, or sometimes called the sensory speech area. Those are important areas. And so these things, if you have an idea of what goes on where and you know what to ask, you can get a pretty good idea, is this region of the brain okay? Or is there something wrong? And how severe is that? And particularly for memory, we can, this is an important way to assess memory. And just minor defects in either short-term or long-term memory can lead to real problems. So again, I want to talk about the different types of memory. And I know I've talked about this kind of in the beginning of the course when I talked about learning. And we have a bunch of ideas about memory. And so I have these two pieces of artwork there, and their titles both involve memory. And one shows memory as a statue of a woman with a helmet and a sword, and it gives you an idea memory is permanent, and it's a guardian of the thoughts and feelings of a person. And it gives you this idea that memory is really strong and forceful. And the other one is, I think it's entitled The Impermanence of Memory, and it shows clocks that are, falling apart and just kind of, like pieces of cloth, that they're malleable. And, there's lots of stuff that we remember and lots of stuff we forget. And we have various kinds of short-term memory that help us interact with the world. We have this sensory memory that tells us, okay, this just happened and it's this part of your body, or it's this sound and it came from this side and it sounded like this. And so it gives you a few seconds to process this. And if it's really important, it may make its way into short-term memory, which is a form of explicit memory. So you can put this into words and it will last for a few seconds or a few minutes. And if it's not reinforced or gone over, it will disappear. As well as sensory memory, it can disappear. It's gone forever. However, some pieces of sensory and short-term memory can be converted into long-term memory. And long-term memory may last a lifetime. Okay, and there's several types of long-term memory, at least two types and maybe more. There's this explicit memory, which is, again, that you can put into words. It's retention of facts, of names, of dates, of places, of sequence, of I read this in the textbook and I know it came there, and so I know it's true and it's in there and I'm going to use it. And then there's also a kind of implicit memory, or sometimes it's called procedural, which are developments of skills like bicycle riding or playing a piano. And this is in the cerebellum. These are often motor things. And so that's a really durable form of memory, and often one of the best. But even more, there's other types of memory that are kind of different. And when my father was living in Freeport, he had lost the ability to form new explicit memories. He had dementia. He could recall some of his older memories. They were sometimes distorted, but new memories were just gone. Things could happen and he would not remember them. And so he didn't, if you asked him, for 10 years, he did not know he lived in Freeport. He couldn't, every time he would see me, he would ask me, "Do you have a job?" And so he didn't know that I had a job or what it was. He didn't know anything like that, even though I probably told him that 100 times. So he couldn't form any explicit memories, but he could still play piano. He could, and he could still play piano from memory. He could still do lots of woodworking type things. And he could form some new memories that were not explicit, but they weren't necessarily manual skills. So like, for instance, we would go to get a haircut. We'd go down to Villa Barber on Douglas Street downtown. And then after we did that, we would go to Union Dairy for ice cream. Okay. And my dad had a sweet tooth. And he could not tell you where Barber was. He couldn't tell you where Union Dairy was. He couldn't tell you what was going on in there in words. But when we would get out of the car, he was excited. Somewhere in his brain, he knew this was going to be good. So it tells you that there are these memories. And so this is a nice little diagram. Sensory memory can be turned into short-term memory through repetition and association. That can wind up as long-term memory. Okay? And so this is how we put things in long-term memory. Things that are important, we either see them repeatedly or we associate them with specific items that help us move them into long-term memory. Okay? As a student, we can all, or not as a student, as anatomists, we can also identify specific regions of the brain that are really important for this. Okay, we know that this conversion requires an intact temporal lobe, and in particular, two regions, the amygdala and hippocampus. If those regions are damaged, there is no formation of long-term memory. Okay. And so that we know that happens. And so we know people that have injuries to those areas are likely to have impaired memory. Okay. To improve memory, we know that one of the most important things is repetition. If you go over something again and again and again, you'll learn it. Okay. If you hear the same song 50 times, you'll know it. Okay. If you hear, whoops, where did I go here? I lost my spot. Okay. If you see something, if you have to do something, physically doing it, like motor activity, or if you have both sensory and sight experience with it, or you hear it, or if it's linked to some sort of previous experience, you're likely to remember it. And then things that develop strong emotions are likely to be remembered because these amygdala and hippocampus structures are part of the limbic system. And so things that generate emotions are likely to be remembered. And they're remembered often after just one experience, and they're remembered quite well. Particularly things that associate strong negative emotions like fear are likely to be really imprinted on our memory, but that imprinting can be so severe that it's through this fear conditioning that it can produce symptoms that we associate with what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. That these memories can become intrusive. They can come up at times when we don't want them to come up. They will bring up the emotions as well. They can also, if things are traumatic enough, the limbic system will always be on alert for those. And so we'll have this memory system will be so much kind of focused on these negative memories that it'll be less attentive to producing new memories that aren't associated with fear. And so real memory and post-traumatic stress, that's a big area of research because it so impacts many other cognitive functions because memory is crucial to them. Okay, and then this formation of long-term memory is also something that happens during sleep. So we call this memory consolidation, and we know that it's associated with this REM sleep, that's rapid eye movement sleep. That's the time of sleep of dreaming. And so we know if that's disrupted, memories are impaired. Certain drugs that disrupt REM sleep will disrupt memory and lead to that. Okay, and so looking at some simple memory tests are important parts of the mental status exam. And then another really important part is looking at language and speech. Can people interpret speech? Can they express their thoughts and their can they express sensory input in speech? So you'll write a letter on their hand and you'll say, what letter is that? And some people won't be able to do it. That's called an aphasia. So there's lots of kind of simple tests of language that we do. Okay. And then we'll often ask people about some judgment and abstract reasonings, things that are associated with the prefrontal cortex. And so these things, simple planning, decision making, and personality, that all happens in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so we really just, this first week, we're just talking about the mental status exam. Okay, that's a really important thing that we're looking at: orientation, memory, language, speech, judgment, and abstract reasoning. Okay, so next time we'll go over other parts of the neurological exam, but for now it's mental status exam is our big thing. Again, if you came in late, make sure your name is in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
When will the test be graded? I know you're busy and everything.
Well, I can't post anything. I have 1 or 2 people missing, and so
okay.
I'm waiting for those people. And so we'll see. I'm hopeful that I can post results Friday maybe, but right now someone's got it open and is waiting. I'm waiting for them to take it. That happens when we have 30 people. People have various things going on. So
right. Okay. And then so we just have like one more final exam, and then like the last couple chapters will be on the final exam, and then over everything else.
So we have a final exam during that final exam week that will cover chapters 15 and 16. Okay, those will be the first time we have those on the exam. And then the rest of that will be stuff that we've already covered. Okay.
Okay.
And so there'll be a selection of questions on previous exams. That doesn't mean I'll be asking new things about those old chapters. I'll try and ask you stuff about similar things that we've already asked about. And of course, some of those questions will come from questions you've already had. Others might be new questions, but they'll be similar. So when you study for the final, look at your old tests, look at your old quizzes. That's a good way to do it. Look at chapter summaries. I'm not going to try and dig out new details that I never asked you about before. I'll try and ask you questions that get at the most important issues from each chapter.
Okay.
Okay.
All right then. Thank you.
And we will. We have next week is a short week because of Thanksgiving. So next week I'll have this meeting, but it won't be graded. And then. So we have more to do on chapter 16, but then the following week will be all review. And so we'll have our usual types of review materials.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the dissections, when When are we
I'm
supposed
sorry,
to
it just broke up for a minute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying the dissections. When are we supposed to submit that?
I will put 2 assignment boxes this week for the brain stuff. So that will come up later this morning. And then I have instructions for the spinal cord that I'll put up this morning as well. That's real easy. It's like one cut. and then you'll work on exercise 18. And then next week, I'll post the instructions for the sheep eye. Okay.
All right.
So that's our schedule. We're not going to have a second lab exam. Sorry.
All right.
By next
thank
week,
you.
the cow eye won't stink or anything.
Well, it's not like I want to use it as a perfume or anything, but it's no more, well, maybe a little more smelly than the brain. It's about the same. None of these smell great, but they're not as bad as they used to smell. You know, pour off the excess fluid and just pour it down the drain at the sink at home, and then run some water down the drain. Okay. And then then just do the dissection in an open area and, take your pictures and I think it'll be okay. Put it back in the bag if you want to save it.
All right.
Okay. And it can, like for me, I would store these things in my garage, because I just don't want them in the house. But I have a spot in the garage where I'd store them, and it really, I've got a couple extra in the bag in the hallway right by my door, and either I can't smell anything or it doesn't smell that bad. Okay. All right. So our time is about up. Okay. So watch for some things to post today. I will put some posts out regarding lab stuff for today. Then we'll have a short week next week. We'll have our Wednesday meeting, but it's not required. Okay. Because the people that have the other lab can't get a meeting in on Friday. All right. Okay, so just check the box, work on chapter 16, and I'll see you soon. Have a good Thanksgiving if I don't see you before then. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.